declared size, and you say I want 5 elements in this array, it stays the length of 5. So if you want to remove something from the middle of it, then it's a problem. Whereas if you want to remove something from the middle of a list, it's no problem at all. It'll resize it. Where'd idle go? Come on. I keep forgetting that this machine was manufactured, powered by a Commodore 64 processor. Come on. There we go. So a list you define like this, right? I mean, you put some things between the square braces. This isn't a program. I'm just, giving you an example. And if you want to, access a specific element, you use its index number, with 0 being the first one, 1 being the second one. And the length of the list is 3, so the highest you can get to is 2. You can only access elements of n minus 1. If you try to go to a sub 3, you'll get an error. However, you can do a minus 1, it'll loop around and get the last one. And a minus 2 will get the second to last. A minus 3 will give you the third to the last. Okay, so there are times when you have lists that you really wish were in another format. Like if you have a list of strings, you've read them from a file, and you wish you could convert them to a list of floats or a list of integers. So I'm going to create a string list. Let's do save as, scripting. I'm going to call it listings.py because a lot of what we're going to do is lists. All right, make a list of strings. Oh, by the way, add this up to the top. Nah, we'll skip that. Okay, slist is equal to, and let's put some numbers. Whatever,
Is the S lowercase intentionally?
I am so sorry, pardon me?
Is the S lowercase intentionally?
No, it doesn't matter.
Okay.
It doesn't matter, yeah. Whatever you call your variable name, just stick with that. Okay, now it'd be really cool to have a list that was a list of integers made from that so that you could sum them up and stuff like that. Here's one way you can do that. You don't necessarily have to type along, but you could create an empty list, and then you could use a for loop, and this is a very common thing to do. For every, string in the S list, add the integer version of that string. That's cool. That works. Let's print iList. Now that I do it like that, I'm not sure why I thought this was such a big deal as to what I'm going to show you next. Okay. Object has no append. Excuse me, I jumped between Java and Python. Append. Alrighty, so that does indeed work, but you can do it programmatically with a single line with something known as list comprehension. The way list comprehension works is you declare it with square braces, and then you put some kind of either expression. Yeah, you put some kind of expression here. I'm just going to do this. For S in, no wait, for S in S list. Now this is going to look kind of odd.
S for S in S list?
Let's do it like this. INT S for every list S in S list. But let's call this I list is equal to that. What that does is, for every S in S list, it calls this function, which could be a function you write, or it could be a function that is provided, and then that's added to a list, which is eventually copied into iList. So it's a way of creating a list based on some criteria in one line, rather than create an empty list and then iterate through the list and add some stuff through it. And it's also going to be a little bit more optimized. It'll run a little more quickly. Okay, I forgot to print that out, so that didn't really show much. But if I print this out, I'll see that it's identical to what we just saw. Okay, so two ways of converting a list of strings to a list of integer. One is to create an empty for loop, an empty list, then iterate through the strings with a for loop, converting and appending each element. Second way is with list comprehension. I shouldn't say the other, because of course there are probably other methods. There's one known as a map. I didn't talk about maps this time. We may mention it next week. What I want to do next week is to go back to our little Beatles website and add JavaScript to it. You know, so that you could fill out a little form, you know, of information you wanted to join the fan club, and it would validate, you know, whether your password was good and stuff like that. So hopefully we'll do. I want to go back to JavaScript for our last class. Let's see. So the other way is to use list comprehension. All right, that's one example of list comprehension. Now, say I want to make a list of all the squares of the values of the numbers between 1 and 10. So I wanted to say 1, and then 2 squared is 4, and then 3 squared is 9, and 4 squared is 16, and so on. Again, I can make a for loop and an empty list and append them, but I can also do it just with a simple list comprehension. Squares is equal, and I'm going to use a range. For every I to the power of 2, that's going to be the function that we use to create our list. And to fill in those values, we're going to do for I in range 1 to 11. So again, what this does is this is another for loop, which we've seen. We can use for loops on ranges. We can use for loops on files. I'd be real interested in using a file handler. And it should work just as well as anything else we're doing. I just haven't ever tried it. But anyways, we will iterate through the range. Oh, if I'm going up to 10, I actually need to make this 11, don't I? Because otherwise it would stop at 9. Iterate through the values. Each value gets copied into I, and then it is fed into this function. And the list is created out of all those values in sequence and stored in squares. So we could print those out. All right. So we made a list of all the squares between 1 and 10. You can put your own function here as well. So I'm going to write an itty bitty function, and if I'm going too fast and you need me to help debug a syntax error, please stop me. So let's define a function called print square or print sq that takes an argument, and we're going to print. This gets super fancy and use formatted printing. %4d, that means print the first number in a space that's 4 wide. %4d, that means print the second number in a space that's 4 wide. And the values we're going to pass into this are I and I to the power of 2. Now if I want to call that function, this looks really weird because I'm not storing the results anywhere. this should work. So print SQ I for I in range 1 to 11. And there we go. It printed a cute little table. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 1, 4, 9, 16, and so on. So the reason I've given 3 different examples is so to kind of hammer it in. You see this syntax and you've used this before. For S in a list or for I in a range or whatever. But then you take that variable and you feed it into a function. And if you want to build a list out of it and store the results of that, that's great. Put a variable over here and an assignment operator. If you don't care about the results, but you want to call a function, which will do something with that value, don't bother storing it in a result variable, but go ahead and call your function there. And the syntax for list comprehension can get a lot more complicated than that, but I feel that that's quite a good introduction to it. Okay, so you can modify the results of list comprehension by using an if extension on it. So this line up here made a list of all the squares. I want to modify it so that it makes a list of only the even squares. So it'll print 4 and 16, and but it won't print 9 and 81 and all those. So I'm going to say evens is equal to, and it's going to look very similar to this one. In fact, I could go and copy and paste this to save some time. That for I squared for I in range 1 to 11. But then I put a conditional for x %2 equals 0. And then print evens out, just to see what it does. That's not going to work.
X is not defined.
Yeah, x is not defined. That should be I.
Okay, I got a syntax error. Probably because I didn't space it.
Well, I goofed you up when I said x %2.
Right.
Really should be I %2.
Oh, equals.
Found it.
Okay, cool. Right on mine.
Oh, because I went up here and did
Oh,
put another percent something D and then
6.
cubed it. Yeah, did 4, 6, 9, and then did I squared and I cubed.
Okay. Run it again. Let me see the exact error. Fine. Okay. Yeah. It's line number, but it should be, of course, it should be on it. Oh, I list is equal to.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. Just like you did square is equal to. And you have a S plural here, it seems over there, so change one of those. All right, I'm going to see it go again. This list has 2 L's up there. There we go. All right. Okay. So this may not be enough to keep you up, late at night, but this is a really pretty cool syntax that you don't run into in introductory courses for like C or Java or whatever. But Python makes it so easy to do that you get to do it. So that's list comprehension. if I was going to add any more comments here, I would say above my definition of function, show calling our own function over a range of values with list comprehension. And then this last one is adding a conditional if to the list comprehension. List comprehension is a weird term. I wish they'd come up with a slightly better word for it.
Automagic.
All right, those are lists. Lists using list comprehension. And I used range a lot, but that's just so that I wouldn't have to go and define a list every time, you know. A range is a lot easier to use than going up here and building a list, but I could have done the same thing, you know. Used a list variable name there rather than a range statement. Okay, now sets. If you've taken a math course recently, you may have run into sets. You know, a set is a list of numbers, you know. But it's an unordered list. It's not considered to have any order. But you could define an empty set, which was just a list, you know, with nothing in it. Or you could define a set, you know, of all the even numbers between 1 and 200 or whatever. And then you have set operations, like what is the union or the intersection of these two sets. And so if you have a set that says 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and then you say you have a set that's 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, then if you do the union of those, it'll equal 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. So instead of defining with square braces, you define sets with curly braces. So I'm just going to declare a set. I'm going to call it 10. Excuse me, I'm going to call it A, and I'm going to stuff the values 10, 20, 30, and 40 in it. And then another one, which has the values 20, 30, 40, and 50 into it. Now I want to unite those sets. Well, firstly, let's just print them and see, you know, are they in order? Did it just create some random order out of that when we ran it? Yeah, look at that. Look what it did. 40, 10, 20, 30. 40, 50, 20, 30. It's like, what? You know, I don't know how it's generating that order, but it's an unordered set. If you want that to be ordered, you can call a sort function on it. Print sorted A. And then print sorted B. And there we go. Our set is back to being sorted. Now, one thing about a set is I believe it is immutable. I do not think that we can call a.append and tack on a new number to a set. Let's prove that. I want to see if this gets a syntax error. Yeah, well, let me try a.add. And that worked. Alrighty, you can add to a set. The next thing I'm going to show you is known as a tuple, and they really are immutable. You cannot remove or add items to a tuple. Okay, so anyways, I'm going to add that to B actually. B.add 60, B.add 70, and then I want to print out the sorted list of B, just to make sure those changes took. Now, why is a list super duper cool? I don't know. I've never found a reason to use them in my own programming. But if you're going to do a lot of math, you know, and you were dealing with set math, then this is an ideal way of doing it. And the set doesn't have to just be numbers. We could be doing the same thing with strings. We could build a set of strings. Okay, now I want to create something that is the intersection of those two sets. I have to use the set class in order to do this. There's no function called intersection, but there is a method, a function that's part of the set class that will do it. So I, the intersection, is equal to the set of A intersection, oh yeah, that was good typing, intersection with the set B. And now if I print this out, it's going to be all the elements that were in A and B. And trust me, they're completely out of order, so when you print that out, go ahead and call sorted on I. So print sorted I.
Oh, okay.
So why does it only say 20, 30, and 40, if you've gotten that far?
You only printed what was in common with the two.
Exactly. Intersection means the two sets, the elements that are included in both sets. 20, 30, and 40 are the only elements that are contained within both A and B. Along with intersection, there's difference. There's two kinds of differences. There's different kind of differences. Okay. One means that it's in set A, but not in set B. And then there's another one called symmetric difference, which is the exact opposite of intersection. Any element that is in A or B, but not in both, is returned to you by a symmetric difference. So let's do symmetric difference. D is equal to set of A dot symmetric underscore difference of B. And then print that out sorted. Yeah, it's nice to have a function name that's 20 letters long. And so when we printed D out, we saw elements that were only in A or B, but not both. And if you've ever heard of exclusive OR, it's the same idea. It's in one or it's in the other, but it's not in both. Okay, now I don't have a lot of examples for what you would use sets for. Matter of fact, I don't have any, but you know. If you've taken discrete math or whatever and your imagination takes flight, then that's great. All right, another data type besides sets. So sets are declared inside these, whereas lists are declared inside square braces. And guess what? We have parentheses. These are called tuples. Tuples are declared inside parentheses. So now I'm going to declare a tuple. A tuple is a list. It does have an order, but it is immutable. You cannot change the values of the objects. So I'm going to make a tuple called Kanye. Because he's going to run for president or something. This is important. Okay. Kanye West president. That's his job. Now I can address each one of those elements just like I can address a list. First off, I'm going to print the entire thing. I'm just going to print Kanye. But then I'm going to print element Kanye sub 0, the first element in that tuple. And then I'm going to print Kanye sub 1. And then print Kanye sub 2. And I could use a for loop to do the same thing. There we go. Kanye West president. But if you try to change one of the values, unlike a list, you cannot do this. You cannot say Kanye sub 0 is equal to, and he's changed his name to Kenny. Error. Tuple object does not support item assignment. You also cannot remove elements from a tuple, and you cannot add elements from a tuple. You cannot pop elements off of a tuple like you can with a list. You can't insert into the middle, whatever. You should be able to add them together. I think I can make a new tuple. This is just an experiment. You don't have to do it. West is equal to Kanye plus Kanye. I wonder if this will work. And then print West out. I have a feeling this is not going to work. Yeah, okay. Oh, that's because I forgot to delete the bad one. There we go. This causes an error because tuples are immutable. They cannot be changed. If you want to release the memory that is held by a tuple before your program is done, there is a command that can do that. I forget what it's called. But you can't change the elements. Alright, that actually did work. You can create tuples that are the additions of two other tuples. And you can do the same for sets. Up there where we had sets A and B, we could have done C is equal to A plus B. And it would have had all the members of both sets. In set terminology, I believe that's called a union. In fact, I'm going to go up there above this Kanye and add that on there. C is equal to A plus B, and then print the sorted version of C. And we'll see that it has every element that was declared in both sets. No? What do you know? I lied. Okay, quick, delete that before anybody sees it. There we go. I know there's a way to do it, but it's probably an operator. I mean a function attached to the set class. Okay. You can add tuples together. You can iterate them with a for list. I think that's about enough of that. But in order to use this, like say we had a file that contained a series of first names, a series of last names, and a series of job titles. And then we used .split to create a list that was all three of them. We would have to remember that element 0 was the first name, element 1 was the second name, and element 2 was the third name. Same idea here, It would be really cool, and if you go on to take a class in object-oriented programming, like Java, if you could say Kanye.name, or and it would print Kanye, and then Kanye.last name, and it would print West, and Kanye.job or occupation, and it would print president. Those are called members, named members. Well, there are named tuples. Named tuples are when the members of the tuple each have their own name, so that you don't have to refer to them by their index value, but you can refer to them by their name. Now we have to add something to the very top for this to work. We have to go and add a collection statement. We have to add an import. So scroll all the way up to the top, and from collections, import named tuple. I'm going to run that just to make sure that I don't have any syntax errors anymore. Okay, cool. Then scroll back down to the bottom after you've added that. And this would probably be a good time for me to wander around and make sure that everybody's got it all working together. Yeah, I know I'm going way too fast. That's correct. From collections, import named tuple. You got it. Cool. Here's where difference with the 2, and I just happened to scroll past it too fast. So make it set a dot difference, D-I-F-F-E-R-E-N-C-E, parentheses, E into parentheses. Then print that out. But print it sorted. Just like you did there. Yeah. All of that's for scroll past it. There we go. All right, named tuples. Named tuples are a very, very, very simple form of object-oriented programming, where you in object-oriented programming you define a class, and a class has named members. So you could declare a class called point, and it would have an X member and a Y member. And so you could declare the point, and you could say point.x is equal to 100 and point.y is equal to 200. You know, so you can always refer to it by that .x and that .y. Well, we can do that much with named tuples. You have to declare your tuple. So I'm going to make a tuple called Rockstar is equal to named tuple. And the first thing you want to do is give it a name. The first parameter should be the name of what it is. So this tuple is called Rockstar. And then after that, you list all the fields in it. We have first name, space last name, space job, or instrument or whatever. Job's easy to type. Now I'm going to make a rock star or two. So let's see. We have Ringo. Ringo is a rock star. His first name is Ringo. His last name is Star. He's the drummer. Let's do Edward Van Halen. Eddie is equal to a rock star. His first name is Eddie. His last name is Van Halen. And he plays guitar and about every other instrument in the band.
Star supposed to have 2 R's?
Pardon me?
The star is supposed to have 2 R's?
Actually, it does for his name.
Making sure.
His real name is Starsky, but kind of like Starsky and Hutch. Yeah, like anybody in here ever watched Starsky and Hutch. All right, here we go.
Unfortunately, they do.
All right, at least I don't have any syntax errors there. So I'm feeling confident that we're on a roll. Print Ringo. And then on the next line, print Eddie.
Nifty.
Yeah, that's pretty cool. When we print it out, we see that it's a member of a data type called Rockstar, and that the first element has the name of Ringo, the second element has the name of Star, and then the job is drummer. And you can refer to those elements by those names. You could still refer to them by their position. I could print Ringo, square brace 0, and it would print Ringo, But it'd be much cooler if I did it like this. Print Ringo dot first name. And then print Ringo's dot job. So first name is the same as Ringo sub 0, but it's a lot easier to remember. It's a lot more descriptive in your program. And the second one, .job, is the same as Ringo sub 2. I didn't print the last name, so we skipped subscript 1. All right, that worked, so I feel confident in leaving it on the screen for y'all. Okay, so what have we covered so far? We have covered, we hit lists again, and then we did list comprehension. Haven't mentioned slices again. I'm going to mention slices again. Then we did sets. We did tuples. And we did named tuples. That's getting real close to all the data collections that you really got to know from a scripting course. The last one that I'm leaving off is dictionary, and I think I have an assignment about that. Even though I haven't lectured about it, I'll save it for next time, I believe, along with our JavaScript assignment. Okay, I'm going to move this up to the top and add some comments about it. Alrighty, that was about it as far as these items go, but I do want you to remember, I think I said that wrong. Hello, cough syrup. I do want you to remember how to get, a specific slice of data out of a set. Out of a list. So if I make a list, Joe, Bob, and Briggs, and then Luke, and I want to only get this element and this element. That's real easy to do. Print A starting at element 1 and going up to but not including element 3. The easiest way to remember that is just to subtract the 3 from the 1 and you go, oh, okay, I'm getting 2 elements. Because people always think, okay, if there's a 3 there, I have to include that one, and you don't. You go up to but not including. So that will print Bob and Briggs. You can leave off either the first or the last number, and it'll either start at the beginning or go all the way to the end. So if I do this, print A 1 colon, and then I don't fill in the last number, that means all the elements starting at 1 and going to end of list. Whereas this one meant the elements starting at 1 and up to but not including. I never remember if putting a tabbed comment like that gives me a syntax error or not. No? Okay. You can also leave off the number before the colon rather than after, and that just means start at the beginning. It's the same as putting 0 colon, so it's not like that's that big of a deal. But, print A starting at the beginning of the list, so I put a colon there without putting anything, and then going up to but not including position 2. So that'll get us elements 0 and 1. Up to but not including element 2. Okay, so those are slices. Why do we care? Well, sometimes, if you have a data set, you've just read a line in from a file, and it's got somebody's name, and then it's followed by a variable number of scores. You may not care about the name, but you may care very much about the scores. And so it's nice to be able to refer to the list just by, the slice that doesn't include the name. So let's make a new little program that does that. But first, let's make our data file. So I'm going to do File New, and just make person's name followed by some scores, some numbers. It doesn't matter what they are. It doesn't matter if they're the same length of numbers or not. I'm going to assume that these are all ints, though, my statements are. If you feel like using floats, then just change the statement when we get to the place where we refer to it as an int. Okay. Then do a save as. Make sure you change the type to text files. I don't think I have a file named scores.txt in here. I probably do, though.
Yes.
Yeah, I do.
By text, that's a pipe.
So let's call it new scores.txt. Now we have our data file. We're going to write a program to read it. And we're going to try to use some of the concepts that we've used already, specifically list comprehension. So now I'm going to do new file. And how do you open a file? You give it a variable name, and then you use the word open, and then you specify the path to the file. Either just the file name and the extension or a fully qualified path. So this needs to be new scores.txt. If you forgot to change the data type to text, then your file name will end in .py, which you can see by opening your title bar, and you'll have to change the open statement to match. All right. Now what I want to do here is write the code and then make changes and then make more changes and then make more changes. So I'm going to think about how I want to do that. For every line, NF colon, print line. Let's just do that. And then let's close our file, f.close. I think I'll call this one new scores.py. Now this is just going to print all the data that's in that file. There's a couple of problems with that data. It's got character turn line feeds in it. Not real copacetic. We need to fix that. There's not actually any blank lines in it. If we converted these all to lists, we would not see any blank lists in here. And I'll show you what I mean. I'm going to say data is equal to line.split. And then print data. We should see some /ns in the output. Well, what do you know, we didn't. Very good. I didn't realize that .split would do a trim. If you do .strip after getting a line, then it will remove all the white space at the beginning and the end of the file. And I thought we had to do that before we called split, but apparently that is not the case. Okay, so we have our data in a line format, and then I converted it into a list format. Now I want to convert that, everything but the first position, into a set of integers, into a list of integers. So, scores is equal to, and since we're doing list comprehension, we use the square braces. We're going to convert them all to ints unless you entered any decimals, in which case change that to a float. So what is that doing? Why did I put 1 : after the data there at the end?
Because the name is in the 0 place and the numbers begin in the 1.
Exactly. I only want to process the slice of data that I want to exclude the first column, the first element. And I could have copied that into another list, and done some stuff with it, but this is an efficient way. So this is serving as my list here. But if I did not specify that 1 : if I just said for every I in data, then it would try to convert the person's name to an integer as well, and we would get an error. All right, now I want to calculate the average, but I don't like the idea of getting an error if we try to divide by 0. So I'm going to define a little average function up here that checks to make sure that the length of the list is not 0. So if len of scores is equal to 0, why don't we just return a 0? Maybe that's not the mathematical definition of an average if you have a set of 0, but for our purposes it's good enough. If they haven't taken any exams, then their average is 0. Now if that's not true, then we'll redo this. We'll do this. Return the sum of the scores divided by the length of the scores. And I want to use that down here. So underneath my scores is equal. I think I'll do this. AVG is equal to the average of the scores. I was going to do it all in one line, but I don't necessarily need to cram as much code into one line as possible. And then I'm going to use that percent syntax to do a formatted print again. We're going to assume that their name is 10 characters or less, so %10s space %.2f. That means, percent period 2f. I put the period after the 2, and that's incorrect. That means print out your floating point number to 2 decimal places, and I want to pass 2 values to it. I want to pass in the first value, which is data element 0, that's the name, followed by their average.
Invalid sequence. Why are you getting that?
And then one more close parentheses after all that. This may actually work, but I didn't. No, average is not defined. That's because I called it averages.
AVG.
I'm going to change the name of my function from def averages to def average. And I also have an error there. I am so sorry. I have the function written right in front of me and I typed it in wrong. Its length of scores, parentheses, is equal to 0. I had to change this line here. This is the new look of it, right there. Now we have some print statements to remove, obviously. So go back in and remove all but the last print statement. And it'll clean up the output significantly. I don't need that one. I don't need that one. But I'll leave those 2. And there we go. There's our scores. As a matter of fact, I'm going to delete those lines just to make the code cleaner. I could probably shorten this code down to the point, where it was like only 2 lines within the for statement rather than 4. But the goal is not to write code that is as difficult to read as possible. And if you think that it's easier to read if you made this a for loop and created an empty list and then appended into that for loop every score converted to an int, then that's fine. You know, any other Python programmer will understand what you're doing. However, this list comprehension, it's considered a very Python-esque way. It's considered a very good way of writing Python. Named tuples are really cool, but they haven't really taken off. They were introduced in the late version of Python 2, and from the notes that I've read, you know, not that many people use them, but I think that they make writing the program a lot easier. Okay, I guess the only other thing that I would like to do to this, and I don't feel like making a change to it, would be to store all the data in a list before processing any of it. And that would be pretty easy. We would create, hey,
Can you put that entire 4 in brackets?
yeah, let's give that a shot. Okay. I'm going to make that separate code underneath here.
I'm getting a list index out of range.
Okay, I'll be right there. So F is equal to open, parentheses, new scores. And then data set is equal to for every S for S in F. And then I'm just going to print the data set out. I'm not going to do the rest of the math on it. But it'd be a cool little thing for you to do. If you have gotten this all to work, to redo this code so that it worked as part of the list. Yeah, that works. See, that is pretty ding-dang neat right there. Reading in an entire data set with one line, putting it into a list so that you could then process it. You could pass it to a function, you know. Okay. Let me get the other code back on here so that...
For why I get a slash in? You get a slash in at the end? Why?
Print
I do.
for the, or after the call to average, data element 0. Just before that print statement, because we know that print statement's bottom. And I think I know what's happened, but let's run that. Well. What's going on is that there's an empty line at the end of your data. It would be nice to check for that.
You are correct.
If you wanted to rule out empty data lines, you could do this. If length of data is greater than 0, then do all this stuff. That way any blank lines would not cause that error. But if you don't have any blank lines in your data, okay. All right. Continuing this train of thought to its end. Let's define a function called print data that takes a line of data and it does all this stuff. Copy these 5 or 6 lines from underneath your for statement and paste it under your print data function. You don't have to have that if statement. I'm going to remove that. Makes it harder to read. And now we will use, for every line, for line in data set. Now that's not correct. Let me revise that. Print data, line, for line in data set. And it's okay if you don't totally grok this last thing that we're doing here, this last little bit. The rest of this is file I/O. I absolutely want you to know how to do. This part where we use list comprehension in order to create a list of integers, I would like for you to know how to do. Okay, I'm going to take this print statement out because I know the data set works. And I'm going to move this open and this close to underneath the print data. You don't have to do this to match. But there we go. So with these 4 lines of code, we have opened the file, we've read it into a data set, which is a list of strings, each line being its own item in the list. And then we process it by issuing a function call on each line of data in the data set. All right, my voice is just about given out. So I think this might be a good point to stop. Are there any questions over the homework? I haven't checked this week to see if people are keeping up with the homework. I also haven't checked just to make sure that we have